Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order Island Transit Board of Directors' regular monthly business meeting, March 7th, 2025. Thank everybody in attendance and everybody online. First order of business is roll call. And so we've got Craig Sear. I do not see Craig.
He hasn't joined as of yet.
Okay, Jill Johnson, I know she was having a struggle with getting online, so she should be joining us shortly. James Pinero,
Present.
Janet Sinclair,
Present.
Melanie Bacon,
Present.
and I understand that in Danny Julian's place, we have Layla Perkins. Layla Perkins.
Present.
Okay, we got that.
You guys will have a quorum, so you're good to go.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at the agenda? Are there any changes to the agenda? May I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Motion passes. The consent agenda, has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from the February 7th business meeting and the vouchers? Any questions, comments?
Move to approve.
Second.
The consent agenda approval has been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
This is the time for public input and comments. This is the time set aside for members of the public to speak to the board about subjects of concern or interest or items not already set aside for a public hearing. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Public comments may be ended or modified if the comments become disruptive or are not germane to the business at hand. Input requiring lengthier comment is best submitted in writing. Any comments? Anybody online, are they able to unmute themselves?
They are, and there are no comments so far.
Hearing none, we will move on to business item number 1. Resolution number 5-24. Who's presenting that? Authorizing the Island County Treasurer to process all payroll-related expenses by electronic funds transfer to the designated payroll bank account effective March 7th, 2025. Could you give us some context?
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So we have our 457 plan through Mission Square. And we process all of our payroll, as most of you know, through Island County. Up until this point, we have been sending contributions via check to Mission Square. So there's a considerable delay and time span that goes before those funds are deposited. So we worked with the treasurer, Tony, to be able to actually do those by electronic funds transfer. So we're asking the board to approve.
Any board comments? Good morning, Jill.
I have a question.
Yes,
Is this the deferred compensation plan, this the retirement plan, and why isn't that going with their regular paychecks then?
well, what happens is there, the PERS, so there's 2 pensions, right? There's the
There's
PERS
PERS.
and then there's the 457. The PERS is set up to go electronically, but up until this point, payroll has been sending the contributions from the employees by check to Mission Square. So, thank you.
No people actually still had checks.
I'm Thank you. I thought so.
Any other comments? On business item 1? If I could get a motion, that would be fantastic.
I'll move resolution, approval of resolution number 524, authorizing the obvious, unauthorizing.
Matt's in the room, you can't do that.
The Island County Treasurer to process all payroll related expenses by electronic funds transfer to the designated payroll bank account effective March 7th, 2025. Welcome to the 21st century. Is that okay to say, Matt?
Second.
We have a motion to approve resolution number 524. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Okay, business item number 2, sales tax and grant review revenue. Our executive director, Melinda Adams, is going to be presenting to us.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I am here to talk to you today about just kind of giving an overview of where we are with sales tax and grant revenue review. This is meant to inform, as at our last session, we had one of our board members ask about exploring sales tax revenue and different avenues that we could use to look at that. So I thought it would be impactful if I could go ahead and show you our whole financial picture. So today's presentation is going to review Island Transit reserve funding history, potential financial impacts of reducing any amount of sales tax revenue, the state of Washington's budget deficit and potential impacts to rural transit agencies, federal funding uncertainties, potential funding reductions and operating impacts, fixed route and paratransit service hours and operating expenses, partnerships with ICOM that can benefit both entities. So please note, this is a high-level overview, and if we want to explore further, it would probably require additional workshops so that we can explore information more in depth. And I would respectfully request that questions be held to the end of the presentation if possible for the flow of information. So next slide, please. So to give a little background and context, in August 2009, the citizens of Island County voted in favor of a 55.24% of up to 0.3% sales tax increase, bringing the total sales tax to 0.9%. This increase became effective in January 1 of 2010. At our last board meeting on February 7th, Island County PTBA Board of Directors asked to review the process for altering the sales tax of the PTBA. Matt Hendricks, legal counsel, is in process of researching this information on behalf of the board and is planned to discuss at April's board meeting. Next slide, please. So to look a little bit at our reserve fund history, Island Transit retains a substantial reserve. Both the board and prior leadership have been excellent stewards of the agency's finances. This slide represents the history of how we accumulated the reserve in projects that were budgeted but not expended. The capital projects outlined above are currently budgeted and again, not yet expended. So just to kind of take you through, I know you can all read the slides. Whoops. I'll give you a minute. It's okay.
Just having a mental. Okay, we're gonna do this again. Sorry.
No worries.
Where?
Here we go. So back in 2020 and 2021, Island Transit received a one-time federal infusion of
It's
COVID relief
going.
totaling about $14.3 million. During that time and thereafter, several capital projects faced supply chain issues. This was a national issue that all transit agencies as well as other industries experienced. So it resulted in not expending a lot of those dollars for projects that were slated during that time. Some of the specific projects that we have budgeted for but still have not expended are the South Whidbey Transit Center, Terry's Corner, and the fuel building. And I'm sure there's a couple of others in there as well that have not been expended. Next slide, please. So the funding impacts of appealing any percentage of sales tax. So interestingly enough, last year at this time, the state was looking at removing the Climate Commitment Act funding, also known as Initiative 2173.
it went to the voters and the voters approved to keep it in place. And within that legislation, you know, this slide actually represents funding that Island Transit would lose and no longer be eligible for should any sales tax reduction take place. So we currently receive through our transit support grant funded by the Climate Commitment Act, $970,629. That was our last year's income. We would also lose a portion of sales tax equalization funding, which is our match that we receive from the state of $390,695. So the state of Washington supports Island Transit with multiple grants, and there are legislative stipulations to these grants that the agency must fulfill. So for example, as I said, written into the legislation for the Climate Commitment Act, it says the transit support grants funded by CCA require that Island Transit or any, doesn't specifically say Island Transit, but any transit agency must maintain or increase local sales tax authority at or above January 1, 2022 levels. And then a portion of sales tax equalization would also be lost by a reduction of sales tax. And that information was provided to me via WashDOT, and I'm happy to forward that to anybody that's interested in seeing the actual legislation. Okay. Next slide, please. This slide represents the dollars associated with only a 1% reduction in sales tax. I wanted to kind of give an example here so that you could see the financial impacts. It delineates the total loss of approximately $3.4 million in 2026 and shows the accumulation of loss at nearly 45 million over 10 years. So the capital projects themselves, the reason they are put into the 10-year category with the with Terry's Corner and the zero emissions grant is because those aren't all expended in 2026. It's expended over a period of time as the projects take place.
Join the meeting.
So during the week of February 23rd, I spent time in Olympia with the Washington State Transit Association Board and met with numerous legislators. The conversations around the state budget shortfall were sobering at best. While the overall deficit amount is not necessarily agreed upon by the House, Senate, and the governor, we do know it's in the buildings. The chair of the Transportation Committee, Representative Fye, discussed the governor's top 3 priorities in transportation. They are the Washington State ferries, roads and bridges, and culverts. Unfortunately for rural transit systems like Island Transit, those priorities have the potential to wipe out what's called the multimodal funding, which currently supports the following operating programs. It's 100% funded by rideshare. It affects regional mobility grants, rural mobility grants, and special needs transportation. These potential cuts, in addition to a sales tax reduction, would be devastating to Island Transit. Next slide, please. So the state grants that are currently at risk under the multimodal accounts, this slide depicts basically an overall 6.1 million a year in operating funds that support transit services to meet the most vulnerable in our community. Over a 10-year period, it's projected to be an approximate $58 million loss.
I'm sorry, is this Island Transit or this is statewide?
These are the funds we give for Island Transit. Yeah. Good question. Next slide, please. Then we take a look at federal funding, and I'm calling them uncertainties, especially after my conversation with Rick Larson, when we talked about certain earmarks that are very different from what's called formula funding. Couple the state deficit with what is happening at a federal level. This slide delineates funding supported by federal grants as a pass-through to the state of Washington. The Federal Transit Administration is currently experiencing a 33% reduction in staff. The result is that grant agreements are not in place, and the current budget continuing resolution is set to expire on March 14th, 2024. Delays in funding are certain with lower staff levels. Island Transit has several operating and capital projects funded by federal money that is not currently in executed grant agreements. Hence, the funds are not obligated and are unsecured. That shows you the South Whitby Transit Center and the hybrid buses. Now, comments from my visit with Representative Larson are that the hybrid buses that are noted above, which were formerly hydrogen, that funding is safe. However, again, these are not in a grant agreement. So he will be following this closely. Our request to change the fuel source has been approved by Federal Transit Administration Region 10 and was submitted to headquarters in DC on February 26th. So he'll be following that, and I'll be following him to make sure that money stays where it needs to be. Next slide, please. This graph, I thought would be helpful to reflect the increase in demand and the estimated cost over the last 6 years for paratransit service hours and operating expenses. So you can see with the service hours climbing up, the crude expenses are also climbing up at a bit of a faster rate as you have increases in fuel costs, maintenance, all of these good things. Next slide, please. This is our fixed route. And this slide depicts an increase in demand and the estimated cost over the last 6 years for fixed route and service hours and operating expense. Okay, next slide, please. Potential operating fund impacts. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm outlining the impact of losing just 0.1% of sales tax and what the potential impacts would be. Please note this does not include the uncertainty at the state with the state and federal funding. This is just a reduction in sales tax. So obviously further study and financial implications would need to be examined in depth to determine any kind of service reduction should that be considered. Next slide, please. So we took a look. This is a breakdown of direct costs associated with Saturday, Sunday, and on-demand service. Direct cost includes Whitby operations, transit parks, Whitby paratransit, Camino operations, Camino paratransit, vehicle maintenance, and insurance. Please note an operating budget reduction of potentially 3.4 million from that previous slide. You can see that even with potential minimum service reductions, this only accounts for a portion of the reduced operating budget. So this potential service reduction involves fixed route, on demand, and any corresponding paratransit service that's required within 3/4 mile of the fixed route operation. We would need to look then for an additional 1.3 million to continue operating on the same trajectory. Next slide, please. So this slide, minimum operations and capital investments, reflects how current reserves could support the agency at its current levels should there be a significant loss of funding projected at the state level. Capital projects listed here are the ones that are only critical to the state of good repair and continuity of operations. Only essential projects are listed. The total cost of capital estimated at 11,740,000, which does not include technology needs, nor any of the capital projects like South Whitby Transit Center, the tree farm, Terry's Corner, the fuel building, and the HVAC project. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of round out this presentation. We know at the county level that ICOM is having challenges as well as other departments of the county. And so I kind of went back in history a bit to look at partnerships that we've had in the past. And then try to present you with some out of the box thinking of how can we partner with them in the future for the betterment of both agencies. So prior projects, in 2011, Island Transit partnered with ICOM on radio equipment, with Island Transit contributing a 20% match. In 2013, ICOM provided support, maintenance, and repair on other technical assistance for its network equipment management systems. Island Transit paid staff cost and expenses for the maintenance of the system. 2017, we partnered on the purchase, installation, and maintenance of a simulcast and radio console system. Next slide, please. So new partnership ideas, and we could explore many more than just this. These were just the ones off the cuff that we wanted to perhaps explore that. So for example, infrastructure in transit corridors, perhaps generating a local match for grants related to that work. So where we share those common corridors, we could actually help with infrastructure investments that would benefit emergency services. Fueling on Camino. Currently, Island Transit uses the county's fueling facility. Perhaps Island Transit could fund some facility upgrades, new pumps, perhaps a new software management system for that facility. Also thought about supporting a portion of a law enforcement position that could monitor some of the areas of Oak Harbor where we currently have some safety concerns. And lastly, a transit signal prioritization, which is a project that was demonstrated at CTRAN with great success. So in conclusion, with all of the funding uncertainties that Island Transit is facing, the sales tax reduction will have far-reaching consequences at this time. Our reserves are critical to ongoing operations and necessary required capital improvements. It is also important to point out that the sales tax is leveling off. It is no longer on an upward trajectory. I respectfully request that we look for solutions to assist Island County outside of a sales tax reduction for Island Transit at this time. And with that, thank you for holding your questions. How can I answer them now?
Yes, I don't necessarily have a question. I just
Okay.
wanted to thank you for the very excellent detail and the information being presented to let us know more about exactly the background of it. Just like, for instance, the grant monies and, one-time grants, so forth, because that explains a little bit about the called surplus reserves if we had it that way. And then also I was delighted to hear that the money secured to go from hydrogen to the hybrid. So
We're close. We're
well,
almost there.
I'm about to say. So and just also the uncertainty with regard to federal monies. That's all I have.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments.
Other questions from the room?
Well, what I'm thinking is that I would agree that it would not be prudent to do a reduction, to pursue a reduction in sales tax while our federal and state funding is in jeopardy. I agree that would be an important path. But I think that I'm gonna be interested in a return to this conversation
Sure.
once those things have settled out.
And as I said, I think that, when we come to that point, when we see where things are at with the other funding, and thank you for that. I truly appreciate that. And I'm sure our community does as well. I think we could put together some workshops to really take a deeper dive and work together as a board and an agency to look at see what that looks like.
Questions from online, Commissioner Johnson?
Can you hear me? Because I couldn't find my buttons there for a while. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So just a couple points of clarification in the presentation. ICOM is not an Island County government function. It is 911 Island County. Our emergency system serves the county, but it's a standalone separate organization, just like Island Transit is. It has its own board of appointed individuals that oversee it. So I just want to make sure that that part is clear. Then
Thank you for that.
the other kind of comment I have is, if you think about the presentation that was just made through their lens, what was just said is, and I think partnership opportunities are great and we should be doing that all the time, but to advocate for sales tax retention so that we can help another entity, kind of implying that maybe, well, they don't need it as much because we can help them. That's not actually the case. That is, they don't have reserves to put up the technology that they need to make sure that if someone calls 911, the phone gets answered. And so I don't want to give the community the impression that just with some added support from transit, that ICOM is fine. ICOM's broken. It's not talking about expansion. It's not talking about, it's not going to have a technology for the future. And so I think the partnership conversations are good, but the way implicit in what we just heard was, well, if we collect all the tax money, we're able to support these other entities. That's not a responsible message. It's not a truthful message. And if the message we're getting today is we need to hold off on looking at this because we may have federal or state cuts, we can't promise another organization that's breaking revenue that we just made an argument that we may or may not have. So I just wanted to clarify that ICOM is really unrelated to this conversation, except for the fact that taxpayers have to pay more money for a lot of different services. And I think it's always responsible to look at the amount of tax we're collecting from citizens. What's not responsible is to put ongoing operations and needs of another organizations on the back of Island Transit, because Island Transit wants to be the ultimate controlling taxing authority. So I just want to clarify that the partnership things are great. And I understand that I made the correlation between how much taxpayers are having to pay. However, nowhere in my mind was Island Transit taking responsibility for ICOM and its operations. And by the way, Island Transit is dependent on ICOM, because if it doesn't work and you call 911 and nobody answers, I guess you're going to have to figure out how to solve your own crisis on the bus, right? We will. So I needed that to be separated in the public presentation portion of this.
Well, and thank you for those comments. And I will acknowledge that the reason I brought ICOM into it, Jill, is when I listened to our last board meeting, I did hear you mention about ICOM. So that's where I got that correlation. So my apologies if I got that incorrect.
Councilperson Seer, did you have comments?
Yes, thank you. I agree with Commissioner Bacon that now is not the time to reduce sales tax. I'm skeptical of the entire proposition of doing so. I just want to thank staff. Clearly, there's a lot of research done. And so, yeah, that's really all of my comments at this point. Thank you very much.
Commissioner St. Clair.
I think, Jill.
Commissioner Johnson, did you have a follow-up comment?
No, I can wait till everybody talks to talk again.
Commissioner St. Clair.
So can we go back to 2 slides, if that's possible?
2 slides from the back.
No, 2 slides. The 2
2
slides I'm interested in is, you talked about the state budget deficits, and rightly noted that the state project priorities are ferries, roads and bridges, culverts. And then you talked about would wipe out multimodal, including rideshare, special needs, rural. So that's the state question, and I'll ask the federal second.
Okay.
The state question is, I believe that on the chopping block this year for meeting that multi-billion-dollar deficit is the possible elimination of the sales tax equalization that we currently enjoy in our state, which is a
Which is
concern.
28%.
So just on that page, and I don't know that you have the answer to this,
Okay.
but it just strikes me that rural county transportation networks are far more on the chopping block than our urban transit partners. And wondered if you, because you talked about 3 separate rural
Mhm.
funds that would be at risk, and I wondered if you had, or anyone had any insights as to why rural transit seems to take it on the chin when we have these issues.
I can express an opinion on both sides of that from having been on the urban side. So on the urban side with those transit agencies such as King County Metro, Community Transit, Everett Transit, they are direct recipients of federal funding, and therefore a lot of their operations based on population density and other factors, ridership information, they receive formula funding from the federal government. So when we're looking at a state, they receive some money from the state, but typically not a lot. And so when you look at the rural agencies, and this is one of the reasons at this board meeting that I was at, that they were hitting it home so hard, is that for Island Transit, for example, we are made up of CCA funding and multimodal account funding. And when the legislature went to the voters last year and they protected the CCA funding, that now my understanding from Representative Bai is they are looking at multimodal accounts. If they have those top 3 priorities, that funding is going to go there first. And it was of their opinion that rural transit agencies like us could then rely on CCA funding. Well, that was why I mentioned all of those programs that are multimodal, which is rideshare, regional mobility, rural mobility, and special needs. So that was the sobering detail. Does that help?
Yeah, it does, and
Clarify.
it aligns with the visits we were having, talking about what happens when Congress direct appropriates, but not to rural counties. And that is a priority of National Association of Counties, is direct appropriations to counties instead of pass-throughs, which often put us at risk. So it aligns with what I heard last week. And then on the federal, the reason the hybrid buses are safe and as we move through that transition in our line item is because they were statutorily established.
Correct.
What were the other sources of funding you referenced?
I'm thinking when I was talking about our capital projects that were funded, say, through 5339 money, which is,
Tell me what
sorry,
5339 is.
it's section 5339, and I don't know, it's bus and bus facilities.
Okay.
That's what it is, sorry. So those funds, while they have been appropriated, they are not in a grant agreement.
It's the budget, and likely if we end up with a year-long continuing resolution, everything appropriated this year's at risk.
Correct.
That
And
answers that question.
we're reliant on the state for those grant applications with the feds.
That's fine. I request then is to take a look at what is appropriated and we can talk about this in another meeting,
Sure.
but, because we are in a continuing resolution, likely to be in another continuing resolution, possibility of one that goes all year, which means every appropriation in 2025 has to roll into 2026.
Mhm.
So I'd like to see what's at risk with, it's one thing to have it statutorily protected. It's another thing if it's just in the other column. I'd like to know what those are.
We'll make sure we get that to
And
you.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
You would think by now I'd know how this stuff works. The only thing that I kind of wanted to say in follow-up to Board Member Seer is I'm on a quest to get some information. This was helpful information, and I want to hear Matt's information. I want to have factual information. I'm not on this board to advocate for an agenda. My personal views about transit are irrelevant. Whether I think it's valuable or not doesn't matter. What I'm trying to do is make a good fiduciary decision right now about what's in the best overall interest of citizens. And I'm fact gathering. That's what I'm asking for, is this board to have facts and not just to make assumptive decisions because something's always been some way, it needs to be some way. The other thing I want to point out is, since I've joined the board, which has not been that long, all the conversations have been about very expensive capital expenditures. If I'm on a board that is trying to figure out how to spend money on capital expenditures, that tells me something. And that is what I'm trying to look at. So I don't like to shorten conversations. I'm a little bit thinking through the fact that we got this presentation before Matt's presentation, because it feels like it's justification always about why we have to do what we have to do, from the very people who benefit from why we do it. But that's government, and a little bit why we're seeing some of the overreaction at federal levels about knee-jerk decisions, because what I've learned in government is you can't trust the people, not that you're not trustworthy, but the culture of presenting information to decision makers from the very people who suffer from cuts is a challenge for us to get factual, accurate information. Today's information was very helpful, was very factual, and I appreciate it. But I think our job is to evaluate information neutrally and not pre-speak our opinion, because I don't have an opinion right now on what we should or should do. What I have an opinion on is getting the information. And I think any board member at this stage that is sharing their opinion before having all the facts is communicating the fact that their agenda matters more than their responsibilities. I don't think that's how it was intended. But I want us to be aware that our job is to simply question the organization that we are responsible for. It's not just to like them. It's not just to believe in the mission. It's not just to listen. It is to ask the tough questions. And that's what I think we're doing right now. And it may not lead to anything, but it is our job to ask the questions. That's what I have to say.
I have one final question, I guess. First, I guess I have a comment. I was kind of horrified to learn that if we don't keep our sales tax at or above this level of 2022, we risk losing the money that we get under the CCA and the match from the state. That's
Sobering.
it's more than sobering. It's a statement to the citizens that once they pass a sales tax, they're never going to be able to reduce. That's what that says. I'm kind of appalled, but that's what the legislature wrote in there. But that to the side, I was trying to figure out, Melinda, what our actual sales tax is. So we get 0.9% for Island Transit is what I heard. You said that 0.1%, if we were to cut, that would equal 3.8 million a year. So is it accurate to say we get about just over $34 million a year in sales tax funds?
Can you answer that?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Please?
And I'm looking at a schedule. In 2024, sales tax was 17 million.
17 million?
There's approximately 2 million on a chart I prepared about a week ago per year. And for every 1/10 of 1%. So you multiply that by 9, you're pretty close to the 2 million I was projecting was out in the future, which a year from now, with 2.5% inflation increase. But in 2024, last year, we got about 17 million.
So you're saying it's 2 million, 1%, 1/10 of 1% is about 2 million, and you said 1/10 of 1% was 3.8 million?
So that's including.
Well, that
some of the
includes the-
equalization reduction.
Okay, that includes these other dollars in there. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Councilperson Seer, did you have a follow-up comment? I see your hand up.
Yes, I just want to thank staff again for all the facts that were provided. And have been really pleased in the last year to be a part of this board, which has asked the staff tough questions and have had to make some tough decisions that we're all familiar with. Thank you very much.
If there are no other comments, we'll move into the next item.
Sorry. Just a comment from the labor perspective. I know you're looking at this to help the citizens of the county. I'd like you to keep in mind, and Melinda mentioned it in the, what's gonna be coming forward in this year, is that we are open to contractor with the wages for our members. Our members that work here are paid 20 to 30% below what the market value is. They are struggling. We have drivers that are trying to raise a family. They're having to work other jobs because they can't afford just to work here. That puts a safety risk on the road. They're continuing to work here because they care about this community. And I understand that you want to help you want to help your 911, you want to help that, but I think keeping in mind that the people that work here because they love this community. And they should be able to live off of what they make here and not have to put their lives and their families in jeopardy by not being able to have a living wage. The international ATU is also following very closely at what's going on at the federal level. They are very concerned. Our local represents 5 different properties, so we're hearing from all around the state on what's going on, and everyone is very, very concerned with what's going on with the state budget, with that huge deficit, and what's also going on at the federal level. All the agencies are looking at really moving a lot of income. And so I think to reduce that 1% at this time and have to dip into your reserves, those reserves may have to last a while. We don't know what's gonna happen with this administration, and we don't know what's gonna happen going forward. Even if things change in another 3.5, 4 years, it's gonna take a while to recover from what's currently being done in those administrations. So I would just ask you to keep them in mind. Thank you.
With regard to special taxing districts or small municipal type districts, normally anytime you're going to do a change of taxation, and of course, I mean, even if it was contemplated, it involves bringing in the voters. And so I would just state that just as a general principle, that any discussion about the feasibility or the damage it would do or whatever, it still has to come before the voters, both to change Helen Transit or to change 911. And in my case, the Metropolitan Park District, I tried to do that, and I'm telling you, it is a project. So I'm just stating that for situational awareness, not stating one way or another about board can change, but I'm just describing to you, it's not a given, even if the board was to try to change.
Thank you all. Really appreciate your listening and questions this morning. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. And I guess the takeaway from this particular presentation is that Matt's doing additional due diligence that will be provided at a later time. And because you haven't spoken to us enough, we'll just hand the mic back over to you to give your executive director report,
Okay,
please.
very good.
Take a
I'm gonna
drink of
take
water,
one
take a
drink of
breath,
water, Rick.
change hats.
Okay. Well, I will make this a bit briefer than the last, since I know you can all read and you all received this last night. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to review. So I'll just hit some high points here. One of them being, we're very excited that we have hired a new HR manager. His name is Terrence Ellison, and he's going to be starting with us on March 24th. Terrence is a 20-year U.S. Navy veteran and a resident of Oak Harbor. He possesses over 10 years of human resource experience and possesses a master's degree in healthcare administration, as well as a master's in human resource management. He is a senior certified professional, the SPHR with all the certifications. And what I'm especially proud of is that Terrence is experienced in transforming organizational culture. I feel that his vision aligns with mine. in helping the culture here and embrace our union partners. He has a desire to work with them and to ensure the best outcome for our employees and our community. So I'm really excited to bring him along. And let's see, I have a couple things on the back that were not included that I can share with you. In April, Meg and I have been working on trying to plan a board retreat, which of course the retreat is actually local. But I have heard from some of our, I just want to clarify that for fiscal reasons, okay, we're not gonna go on a trip.
We're just meeting in a different room.
Right.
Dang, I put that condo in play for us.
So, what I have heard, there's been some expressions from a couple of board members that were interested in maybe bringing someone in to review the role of board and executive director in transit agencies. So we are working on that. More to come. We will try to get some time secured on your very busy calendars. So there's that. Ridership information. For fixed route on Whidbey last month, we had 23,603 unlinked passenger trips, which were an increase of 5.7% over last year. Camino actually experienced 4,539 trips, which was up 26%. Now that's a really high number, and I would say that's probably evidenced by the removal of on-demand. So that's probably how those
Interesting.
numbers went.
After all my advocacy for on-demand, I was wrong.
Well,
Well, it was the return of the old fixed route.
Sure.
It
Yeah, but we
wasn't-
still serve South Camino, which was our goal
Yeah.
with on-demand, was to serve South
For the
Camino,
first
so. But I'm always willing to say I'm wrong.
For our paratransit folks on Whidbey, we had 4,531. That was up 5% over 2024 in February. And on Camino, we had 581. That dropped 36%, but that's likely due to the removal of on-demand. So kind of interesting how that
That's interesting.
fluctuates. And then at our last meeting, I believe, Vice Chair St. Clair, you had asked about the tree farm and an update on that. And so Meg was nice enough to put something together for me this morning. Our legal counsel reviewed the RFP put out by the Whidbey Camino Land Trust and the U.S. Navy to provide an appraisal report that will determine the fair market value from the extinguishment of the conservation easement on a portion of the adjacent property now owned by Island Transit. Legal counsel determined that it is appropriate for the appraisals on both the Island Transit adjacent parcels and the PRI property to proceed. Island Transit will reimburse the Whidbey Camino Land Trust for the cost of these, since they go towards the Island Transit's obligation to purchase and acquire equivalent property. The baseline cost of that obligation still needs to be established, and the Whidbey Camino Land Trust will notify Island Transit when access to the adjacent property is needed. That's our update. Was that helpful?
Yeah, I'm free for more questions, but let me
Okay.
move on.
Okay. And that is all I have, unless there are any questions.
I just had a comment before we moved on with your announcement of the new human resources manager. I just wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude to Commissioner Bacon for her tireless service and standing in the gap in human resources for Island Transit for far longer than we ever imagined. And we know that you've been wearing a multitude of hats throughout this time, have made significant impact on the organization, and just deeply grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I want to acknowledge there's no way that I would have been able to do the pieces that I did without Stephanie
Yes.
Smith and
Yes.
Jeannie Hines. We were very, very lucky to have had a really exemplary HR staff here to provide support throughout this transition.
And I want to extend my thanks especially to Stephanie and Jeannie that, I held out until we could find someone that really fit the culture and the role. And that put a lot of strain and a lot of weight on them. So thank you for all your extra work during that time. We're almost there.
We're good, we're good.
At this-
Thank you, Jeff.
We'll hand the mic over to our,
Madam
sorry.
Chair, I see a hand up
Oh,
again.
pardon me. Councilmember Seer.
I have to say that I have never been more excited to read the content of an executive director's report. The starting with the internal promotions, that I'm just so glad we're rewarding and promoting from within totally appropriately. Of course, I now have a bit of a insider knowledge in some sense with, you know, the particulars of what those employees provide to the agency, and they so deserve their promotions. And I'm just really pleased about that. Interesting to see such a large class of drivers coming through. The qualifications of the HR director is going, or the next HR director, really impressive to see that. I just kind of like in reading your report, Melinda, I just kind of grew. It was just so exciting. And I do have to close with thanks to Commissioner Bacon, working with her and seeing what she did, you know, inside the office there with some really difficult decisions and you know, encountering components of Island Transit that needed to change, and you know, really honestly just really brave work and difficult work, and the agency would not be where it is now without her contribution. So thank you, Melanie Bacon.
Thank you, Craig.
In a time of transition and need to have someone come alongside us and put the human in human resources. Says a
There
lot.
you go.
Says a
I
lot.
echo you on that.
Thanks. So we'll turn the mic over to Paul with our finance report.
Morning. I'll be reporting today on the data for January, it's a January finance report. This was reviewed by just two members of the finance committee, myself and Councilwoman Wright. First slide, just talk a little bit about cash sources. Our tax revenue was up about almost 24,000, 1.73% versus last year's actual. You can also see by this slide that we also had considerable contract revenue and with one grant for 3 months worth of revenue, as well as our normal investment interest and band flow. Next slide, please.
Where was that contract revenue? State or federal?
Well, it came from the state, but it included federal and state monies.
Federal pastors? Okay, that's the kind of thing I want to track to see what's at risk. Thank you.
So if we look at this graphically, January collected in November, is down about 10,000, 10,500, 0.75% below what we had budgeted. And most interesting line here is the green line showing whether we met our budget or not. And you can see it for January, we were still below budget. So 9 of the last 12 months, we were below what we would normally expect, which was in 2024, 3% above the prior year, and then in 25, 2.5% above the prior year. We lowered our expectations to 25 and still just materialized. And then for the year, the first month, we're 0.41% below where we would expect for the year. So, next slide, please. As they give a little better clarity about what the operating grant revenue was. So you can see 411, 412, mobility management, equalization, and paratransit. Equalization, we received 3 months. The other is 2 months of revenue. There's also a small wellness grant we received from WISTA for $2,300. Next slide, please. Investment interest and investment rates. In January, we received about $155,000. That was down almost 2%, about $3,100 from last month on our 67 million invested in the ICTIP, which was also down 8 basis points, or about 2.85%. So the chart shows different investments that a lot of local governments will invest in. LGIP has been decreasing, and with interest rates, they hold primarily up to 90-day investments. 2-year treasury, a lot of organizations will invest independently in 2 or 3-year treasury instruments, or other similar instruments. You can see that's been holding pretty steady. And ICTIP also has been holding pretty steady as well, but has declined slightly.
Is that the difference in, as we look at investments and stewardship? LGIP has shifted their strategy, and they did that following the challenges of what happened with interest rates in the last 5 years. Let's just put it that way. So they have shifted to a shorter term window on their investments, whereas Island County's not been able to shift as quickly because our emphasis, or the emphasis, was on longer term holds and things like that, protected us during the difficulties of the past 5 years. I don't know where the treasury sits in that ratio of short term versus long term, but what I see there is that in good times, the short terms are beneficial, and in bad times, you see them dropping. And Island County, we were well below the state in a long time. But what's your thought on that? Because it's been such a struggle for us as a board to see that disparity.
Yeah. Well, the 2-year treasury is just a fixed rate, just like any other treasury instruments you can buy in between, 3 months and 30 years. So you just make a choice there. So I think the bigger argument is between should you go after funds that are really short-term oriented or others that are longer-term oriented? And I think that the ICTIP is probably trying to get into that 3-year purchasing model. And a lot of investment brokerages and advisors do advise that longer term, because they think if you choose that 3 to 5 year term, that in the long run, they've seen that you'll come out ahead. But there, of course, is no guarantee of that. And, interest rates went up, like you say, in the last few years, and no one would have expected that following an era where they were down in the basement. But now everyone thought that interest rates are going to be dropping, and in the last few months, they've kind of held steady. So the first lesson to learn is that you probably can't predict interest rates. And the second is that you need to diversify. And that's what I think ICTIP is trying to do. And they're trying to take a little longer term because they feel in the long run, they'll come out ahead. But in this current market, it's just, it's kind of an inflationary market. And interest rates have been staying high.
Interesting.
And it's been great for the people that have that really short outlook. They've been successful, but there's no guarantee that. Maybe in the next 10 years, the interest rates will be close to zero. You just never know. Yeah, but diversification is the way to go. And the 3-year strategy is at least locking in and having some certainty for 3 to 5 years. At least you're guaranteed something. If interest rates suddenly drop, which I don't think is going to happen, but if they did, ICTIP will be looking pretty good.
We could just make that graph go back 3 years and we'll look good again.
Next slide. Cash uses. So payroll was about 1.4 million, almost 1.5 million. It was up 362,000, 32.5% from last month, up 471 or almost 47% from last year. And that was mostly due to some bonuses that were paid out January, over $300,000 worth. Accrued payroll, 1.4 million was up 365 or 31%, and still due for that very reason. I should remind everybody that those bonuses, I don't believe were budgeted. So we should just keep that in the back of our minds. January, non-payroll payments, 1.2 million, up 463,000 or 62% from last month, 354 up 41% from last year. And that's primarily just a record that we purchased. And that was a big ticket item. All right, next slide, please. And there you have it. January capital, primarily the record, 634. Next slide, please. Cash reserves, you can see the record there in the support vehicle, reduce that particular assigned fund. Total cash, 69 million, up 514,000. Sounds high, but you have to remember that we had an influx of 1.6 million in grant money. So our operations is taking a greater gravity on our finances. Next slide, please. Cash reserves, you can see where we are graphically. One thing to note on this chart is the green line, how that seems to be growing in the last 2 months. So what we did is we shifted to in December the perspective of only items that are budgeted will be assigned in the funds that they're budgeted for. Before we had other projects on the table that we don't think are really likely to materialize. Hydrogen center might be one of them. And so this is more reflective of just current 2025 budget, where we're going from here on out, which in an increasing green line means there are more available funds for other projects if necessary. Next slide, please. Budget actual. We already talked about sales tax slightly below our goal of 8.33%. Interest is above where you might expect it, but I think we are also in this budget expecting interest rates to drop. And they haven't. So we're still getting that revenue, even though we expected that to be decreased. We'll see where that goes as the year progresses. The next slide, please. Again, a couple items we might want to pay attention to. Subscription and fees, 36%. We got well beyond our expectation, but our subscriptions and licenses for software, et cetera, happen. A lot of that happens in January for the year. And then wages and taxes above, or wages, taxes, and benefits is above our goal. So that includes those bonuses that were paid out in January. We don't see that very often. Then we have utilities. I was looking at it a little more closely. Our electrical seems to be continuing to rise. So, and we also have new implementation of FirstNet, which is communication software that we've transitioned to, which is I've learned from our IT staff is extremely reliable and more secure and gives us a wider range, but it is a little more expensive than what we were doing in the past. And that's the end of my presentation. So if anyone has any questions.
Go ahead. And with regard to the federal funds rate inversion, I guess it's called, where the long-term rates end up being lower than the short-term rates. They use that as kind of
Oh, right.
they use that as a predictor, as an indicator of potential recession.
Yeah, that's right.
But I'm just as a matter of information, are we still in an pretty much an inverted situation?
No, I
where the
think-
long-term rates are.
That has changed in the last year. I mean, if you open up your Wall Street Journal, you go down and look at those, that the rate curves.
Yeah.
And our short-term rates, for those of you who invest in CDs on a short-term basis, you're probably getting a much lower rate. And the long-term rates have actually stayed about the same. You know, I look at 20-year rates, the last time I looked at it was like 4.5 or 4.6. And a short-term 3-month CD, I mean, you probably know this better than me, it's probably around like 4%, 3.5%, if you go to your local bank.
But these federal fund rates, they affect, how our borrowing costs and what we get in our investment vehicles.
Indirectly, because the ICTIP is primarily just investing, some of their money goes into LGIP. But they're primarily investing in like government entities, bonds, and maybe treasury securities. And if they're going after a treasury security, it'll probably be more reflective of like a CD rate.
I see.
But I don't know if it necessarily the comparison of short-term and longer-term rates really affects what they're purchasing, other than the items that they're purchasing on that curve
Right,
might be changing.
okay, thank you.
Questions?
Any questions from online? No, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have another?
I did.
Oh, Paul, we did have a question. I apologize.
So, and I don't
Commissioner
even know if I
St.
can do this, because we already approved the vouchers, but when you went through the budget changes and you talked about where we had variances, I took a glance at the vouchers and went, huh. So you talked about, we often pay out, we just have, see this in other agencies where I sit on the board, where we pay out things at certain times of the year, so that's throws the variance off. But we had a almost $27,000 subscription to vSphere. Would anybody like to tell me what that is, just because it caught my eye?
To what?
vSphere. That's
vSphere.
vSphere Foundation a subscription license at $27,000.
It sounds like an IT software package that I don't know the details of.
Well, I would, it's the kind of thing that when I look, when you're telling me we're a variance and then I look in the vouchers, I'm looking at, well, where were our big ticket items and can we do a little, just a tad of due diligence on that?
Yeah.
And then I'm just gonna make a remark just to be snide,
Okay.
so warning in advance, snide alert. $51,000 for license and title registration on our damn record.
I know.
So I know you don't control that, and we had to license and title, and it's sort of a requirement, but holy cow.
It was a.
I was gonna say, the nice thing about that is that we're paying in sales tax. And that money goes to the state, and then oftentimes that'll.
It makes the-
Good point, we're paying for that, which returns to us.
The other
I
thing
didn't mean
is,
to be snide, I did at least warn you.
you know, oftentimes we'll see expenses that are fairly high, like fuel expenses, where there's a timing difference, and we might not pay anything in January, but then double in February, so it's just the timing, the shortness of the.
Right. At least that was-
Causes those.
So just that in the bonus is just a follow-up. on-
One of the things that Paul and I did discuss during the finance committee meeting yesterday was subscriptions, because I did have a question just from an overall line item. And I do know that all the managers come together in pre-planning for the budget to review all necessary and, you know, all of the subscriptions. I think do we only have one software technology that's running in parallel while we're transitioning out?
There were two, one that, you know,
So
I'm
those
really
will come up.
closely aligned with, which is FleetNet and NetSuite. Because when we do a changeover, you really need an old system to serve the auditors while we're converting to the new one. We don't only know if the new one is 100% reliable, so we have to rely on something.
Yeah, you wanna make the backup for one.
And
So yeah,
I
those
think
two will
Route
come.
Manage, Patio is another one where the two are overlapping. While you're implementing one system, again, you don't know the reliability, so you have to keep that open running.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Matt, we're not making any decision. We're going into executive session now.
No.
But- okay. So at this time, we're going into executive session. to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency matters relating to agency enforcement actions, or to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation to which the agency, the governing body, or a member acting in an official capacity is or is likely to become a party when public consequence to the agency. When knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in an adverse legal or financial consequence to the agency, RCW 42.30.110. We will reconvene only for the purposes of adjourning.
Like how long do you need? 10 minutes? At most.
10 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No.
Recording.
We have completed our executive session. Are rejoining the regular session to adjourn. Everyone have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, I'm having mixed feelings about having